A storm is brewing within the royal walls, quiet, calculated, and chilling. Behind closed doors at Windsor, an unexpected standoff has emerged between two of the most powerful women in the monarchy, Princess Anne and Queen Camilla. What began as a subtle disagreement over protocol has now turned into a symbolic power struggle. And as Catherine silently watches from the sidelines, Anne does something no one expected. She picks a side. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The grandeur of Windsor Castle has always masked the undercurrents of conflict that occasionally ripple through the monarchy. But this time, the ripple was an earthquake. What many believed to be mere procedural differences over ceremonial adjustments quickly spiraled into something much deeper, a veiled challenge to the future balance of royal authority. At the center of this divide stands Queen Camilla, emboldened by her consort status and increasingly acting as the gatekeeper of new royal protocol. She had begun introducing modifications to the traditional flow of appearances, orders of precedence, and communication channels, all under the banner of modernization. Yet to Princess Anne, the longest-serving royal and the unyielding guardian of her mother's legacy, these changes didn't just cross a line, they erased it. Anne has never been one to play political games or seek attention, but her instincts have always been sharp, grounded in duty rather than drama. So when whispers reached her of Camilla's quiet restructuring within the royal household, adjustments that noticeably sidelined Princess Catherine from certain key duties, Anne did not wait. Those familiar with the internal dynamics say Anne began to subtly challenge these shifts, not in public view but through her presence, her absence, her expressions, and her piercing silence at certain events. Observers recall how Anne began walking into engagements late, forcing Camilla to wait, or how she would skip ceremonial cues, disrupting the polished rhythm Camilla's new order demanded. It wasn't open rebellion, but it was defiance nonetheless. Windsor, once a symbol of unity, suddenly became a house divided. Loyal aides began choosing sides in whispers and glances. Some claimed Anne was being overprotective of outdated tradition. Others whispered that she was the only one brave enough to speak a truth no one dared to confront, that Camilla's changes weren't about efficiency, but about legacy, power, and erasing the memory of a woman who once reigned supreme. Meanwhile, Catherine, graceful, reserved, and ever loyal, remained composed in public, even as she was increasingly cut out of certain ceremonial briefings. Anne noticed. And that's when everything shifted. The once unshakable Princess Royal began appearing more frequently beside Catherine, her actions quiet but thunderous in meaning. It wasn't just solidarity. It was a statement. The palace's immaculate exterior could no longer hide the growing fracture inside. No official word had been spoken. No scandalous headlines had been released, but those who know how to read the silent language of the royals understood one thing with terrifying clarity: this was more than a disagreement. This was a reckoning. And it was only just beginning. But what exactly did Camilla propose, and why did it strike such a nerve with Princess Anne? Behind the grandeur of state ceremonies and palace appearances lies a web of private reforms Camilla hoped to quietly implement. With Charles increasingly unwell, Camilla moved swiftly, introducing behind-the-scenes changes meant to consolidate her influence. But the changes weren't just administrative. They directly challenged the foundations laid by Queen Elizabeth herself. Though the public continued to see polished royal events and carefully staged photographs, something was brewing deep within the corridors of policy. Buckingham and Windsor. Camilla, emboldened by her elevated position, had begun orchestrating a quiet restructuring of power, one that subtly tilted the scales in her favor while diminishing the ceremonial presence of others. At the heart of her initiative was a detailed plan to centralize royal protocol, tightening the flow of responsibilities so that key decisions passed through her newly appointed aides rather than the traditional channels overseen by long-serving royals like Princess Anne. Under the guise of efficiency and streamlining, Camilla's inner circle began issuing new guidelines, some seemingly harmless, others outright controversial. A new hierarchy of appearances was drafted, placing Camilla at the forefront of select engagements traditionally reserved for the senior working royals. More alarmingly, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, found herself omitted from several major ceremonial briefs without explanation. Invitations were rescinded, dress rehearsals were conducted without her knowledge, and her name was suspiciously absent from internal event schedules. Aides, loyal to Catherine, began quietly sounding the alarm, sensing something far more calculated was underway. The whispers grew louder when reports surfaced that Camilla's advisors had met in secret to reassign several roles once under the Queen's personal discretion. These meetings were not held in the usual open fashion but tucked away behind heavy doors, with only a tight inner circle present. It became apparent that the consort was not just modernizing for the sake of logistics, she was staking her claim to permanent prominence within the evolving monarchy. But perhaps the most audacious aspect of Camilla's plan was her decision to bypass Princess Anne entirely during several key protocol discussions. Traditionally, Anne had functioned as a sort of ceremonial overseer, a steady hand ensuring consistency with her mother's long-standing traditions. To sideline her was not just an oversight. It was an insult. Camilla framed the move as a generational necessity, citing the need for fresh structure. But the seasoned palace staff knew better. The late Queen's structure wasn't just a system, it was a sacred script, one that held the monarchy together through decades of change, scandal, and reinvention. To alter it now, and to do so without Anne's input, was to tamper with something sacred. The more Camilla's vision came into focus, the more unsettled the atmosphere within the royal household became. Some aides voiced discomfort, while others stayed silent out of fear. The cracks widened, no longer invisible, and the woman who had kept the monarchy's ceremonial backbone intact for decades was watching closely. And when Anne discovered what was happening, her response sent a shockwave through the very foundation of the royal household. It wasn't a public spectacle. There were no cameras, no formal declarations, but those inside the council. Room that morning say the silence that followed Princess Anne's words could shatter glass. Without raising her voice, Anne made it unmistakably clear Camilla's changes were not only inappropriate, they were unacceptable. The closed-door meeting had been billed as a routine discussion on the evolving structure of the royal household. With King Charles's health in steady decline, and Camilla assuming more day-to-day leadership, this was no meeting, it was a declaration of a new monarchy. Camilla presented her vision with poise, suggesting sweeping updates to how the household functioned, centralized communications, tighter engagement protocols, and revised precedents for official appearances. At first, there was nodding, murmured agreements, even polite applause. But Anne, arms crossed, said nothing. She waited until Camilla had finished, and then, in a room full of seasoned advisors and family members, she tore through the illusion with one piercing question. Is this about the monarchy, or about you? The air froze. Camilla's smile didn't fade, but her composure cracked ever so slightly. Anne didn't accuse her directly. She didn't need to. Her words, calm but devastating, dismantled the very premise of Camilla's proposal. Anne questioned why long-standing structures needed to be rewritten without transparency, and why the Princess of Wales had been systematically sidelined in favour of undefined efficiency. Her voice didn't rise. Her tone never wavered, but her words carried the weight of a monarch. This wasn't Anne the sister. This was Anne the protector of the crown. And when Camilla attempted to pivot, suggesting the Queen would have supported modernization, Anne responded with chilling clarity. The Queen valued tradition, not because it was old, but because it was earned. There was no shouting, no slamming of fists, but every eye in that room could feel the shift. Tension radiated from the opposing philosophies laid bare. On one side, Camilla's vision of a rebranded royal family streamlined, curated, and conveniently adjusted to place herself at the centre. On the other, Anne's ferocious commitment to the invisible code Queen Elizabeth had lived by for 70 years. One built on quiet power, dignity, and unspoken rules. As Anne spoke, some staff reportedly lowered their eyes. Others, used to Camilla's growing influence, sat frozen. But there was one moment that sealed the weight of the encounter. Witnesses say Queen Camilla sat stiffly, her smile fading, while a longtime aide whispered, For a moment, Anne became the Queen Elizabeth of that room. It wasn't just what Anne said, it was how she said it. With restraint, with conviction, with a sense of timeless authority that reminded everyone of the Queen, who had once kept the entire royal edifice from crumbling. Anne didn't wait for applause or agreement. She stood, nodded to the group, and left the room. The silence she left behind wasn't just uncomfortable, it was seismic. The council didn't end with consensus. It ended with a question that would haunt Camilla's circle for weeks to come. Had Anne just drawn the line no one else dared to? No notes were taken, no announcements were made, but everyone knew something had shifted. A private rebellion had been ignited. But what truly stunned everyone wasn't Anne's resistance, it was the name she invoked as her reason. Anne didn't just push back on Camilla's authority, she pointedly defended Catherine in front of the entire royal inner circle. For the first time, the Princess Royal publicly aligned herself with the woman many now see as the true heart of the monarchy's future. And that declaration, subtle as it was, could not be undone. The silence that followed Anne's confrontation wasn't just out of shock, it was reverence. In a single breath, she not only challenged Camilla's right to reshape the monarchy, made it undeniably clear who she believed should carry the crown's moral weight into the next generation. Anne's words cut through politics and protocol with surgical precision. She reminded the room that it was Queen Elizabeth, not the press, not the courtiers who had quietly begun ushering Catherine into the heart of royal life. Not with titles or press statements, but with trust, presence, and responsibility. The Queen had chosen her engagements carefully in her final years, and Catherine had been at her side through nearly all of them. That wasn't coincidence, it was preparation. Anne's defense wasn't a lengthy speech. It was precise, principled, and pointed. Catherine was chosen, she said. Not in words, but in action. You all saw it, and so did the public. She then recalled the day Elizabeth handed Catherine the reins of a deeply personal engagement, one the late Queen had never delegated in 70 years. That moment, Anne said, should have ended all speculation about where the crown's true trust had been placed. The emotional weight of those words wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Catherine, seated nearby, didn't react visibly, but her eyes, according to one aide present, welled ever so slightly. She had not expected such a fierce endorsement, especially not in that setting, and especially not from Anne, the royal known for her stoicism more than sentiment. Camilla, by contrast, visibly flinched. She wasn't prepared for this level of precision in Anne's resistance. Anne hadn't accused her of undermining Catherine. She had painted a picture of what loyalty, legacy, and lineage truly looked like. Camilla's authority, suddenly, felt performative by comparison. And worse, Anne had cleverly invoked Queen Elizabeth not just as a figure from the past, but as a guiding spirit for the future. The Princess Royal's alignment with Catherine instantly reframed the narrative playing out within the palace. No longer was this a generational tug-of-war between old and new. It was now a battle over who truly embodied the Queen's values and who did not. Behind the scenes, aides took notice. A shift began rippling through palace dynamics. Catherine's team felt an unspoken boost in confidence, while Camilla's inner circle scrambled to contain what they now understood was more than a disagreement. It was a breach. The public would never hear of what was said in that room, but the tone of engagements shifted. Invitations changed. Seating arrangements were altered. The invisible lines of power had been redrawn, and they traced directly to Anne's quiet, yet seismic declaration of loyalty. But Camilla wasn't about to let this defiance slide quietly. Camilla may smile in public, but behind the scenes, her retaliation was swift and strategic. Insiders say she summoned her closest advisors that very evening, determined to reassert control. And when the palace's internal documents were quietly rewritten, it became clear Camilla was drawing battle lines. She had been humiliated not through public scandal, but through private defiance. Anne's rebuke, sharp and symbolic, had undermined not just Camilla's reforms, but her authority. That kind of challenge couldn't go unanswered. So Camilla did what she had learned from years of maneuvering behind palace walls. She moved in silence, using bureaucracy and influence as her weapons. Her team, emboldened by the Queen Consort's fury, set to work immediately. Briefings were rewritten, ceremonial orders subtly reshuffled, and appearance schedules were abruptly revised. On paper, the changes looked routine, but to those paying attention, the message was unmistakable. Camilla was tightening her grip. One of the first signs came when an upcoming engagement previously set to be led by Catherine was abruptly postponed. No reason was given, and no explanation followed. Then came the press releases, where Catherine and Anne had once featured, prominently alongside King Charles. Now their names were buried or omitted entirely. Ceremonial seating arrangements were altered in subtle but symbolic ways, placing Camilla squarely at the visual center. These weren't just coincidences, they were warnings. Catherine's team, once confident after Anne's show of support, found themselves stalled, their communications curiously delayed or rerouted. Some were told to hold off on planned initiatives until further notice. And behind palace doors, whispers began to spread that Camilla had instructed key staff to begin filtering Anne's involvement in select engagements, citing the need for generational focus. But it wasn't just those inside the palace who noticed. Observers in the press began asking questions. Subtle leaks from unnamed insiders hinted at what was really happening, a power realignment within the royal family. One that had less to do with King Charles and more to do with the two women circling the future throne. Publicly, everything appeared poised and polished, but privately, the tension was mounting fast. Camilla, who had long played the role of conciliator in the eyes of the media, was now seen by some as consolidating too much control too quickly. For Anne, this was the clearest confirmation yet that Camilla wasn't simply interested in modernizing, she was rewriting the narrative. Royal watchers began to speculate openly. Was the monarchy experiencing a silent civil war? Was the House of Windsor splitting between two queens, one by title, the other by trust? And most unsettling of all, what role would Catherine play now that the walls were closing in? Allies of Anne and Catherine braced for further retaliation, uncertain how far Camilla was willing to go to maintain her dominance. But as it turned out, the most unexpected counter didn't come from Anne. It came from the very woman Camilla had tried to suppress. Yet amid the rising tension, an unexpected move from Catherine shifted everything. Catherine had remained silent for weeks, choosing dignity over drama. But as whispers turned to headlines and tensions boiled beneath the crown, she stepped forward not with anger, but with grace. Her statement was brief, but it stunned both allies and critics. She wasn't fighting for power, she was fighting for the legacy of the monarchy. Released through a carefully worded public letter published in the Times, Catherine's message made no mention of Camilla, Anne, or the chaos erupting within royal ranks. Instead, it spoke of values, of preserving duty, of walking the path Queen Elizabeth once carved with quiet strength and unwavering humility. Yet beneath its calm tone, the message struck like thunder. Royal commentators immediately recognized it as a direct, if elegantly veiled, rebuke of Camilla's recent moves and the palace infighting that followed. Catherine had chosen not to name names, but her silence until that moment, followed by such a precise articulation of loyalty and legacy, left little doubt as to whom the message was truly meant for. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media, editorials, and talk shows exploded with praise for the Princess of Wales. Many called her the rightful heir to the Queen's moral throne, a symbol of the monarchy's future who stood for grace under fire rather than control through manipulation. Even some of Camilla's longtime supporters began to fall silent, uncertain how to defend the recent shifts in palace dynamics without sounding disloyal to the ideals Queen Elizabeth had embodied. Just days after the statement, a powerful image emerged. Catherine stepping out for a quiet charity engagement, arm in arm with none other than Princess Anne. No words were spoken, but their united appearance spoke volumes. The woman who had once defended Catherine behind closed doors now stood firmly beside her in public, sending a message as powerful as any press release. Inside the palace, Camilla's allies scrambled to recalibrate. With Catherine commanding public sympathy and Anne providing institutional weight, Camilla's hold on the inner workings of the royal household began to falter. Leaks stopped, briefings dried up, and as the press began drawing a clear line between Camilla's silence and Catherine's poise, it became evident who had truly won the court of public opinion. But perhaps most telling of all was Prince William's reaction, or lack thereof. While he offered no public comment, insiders revealed that he fully supported his wife's decision to speak out and saw it as a necessary defense of their role in the future monarchy. Yet, ever cautious, he remained outwardly neutral, knowing that any direct challenge to his father's wife could ignite a war the crown wasn't prepared to fight, at least not yet. Still, the mood within royal quarters had shifted. Catherine had not only survived the quiet assault on her role, she had reversed the quarters' narrative without ever throwing a single punch. But this newfound clarity came at a cost. Behind closed doors, strategies were already forming, tensions crystallizing into silent grudges. And while Catherine had reclaimed her dignity, someone else was preparing to take the battle one step further. But behind palace doors, Anne wasn't done yet. Her next move would ignite a firestorm. In a move no one anticipated, Princess Anne reached into the past to protect the future. Drawing from her mother's original ceremonial practices, Anne quietly began instructing royal staff to follow the old ways, not out of rebellion, but out of duty. Suddenly, the Queen's legacy returned like a ghost within the palace walls. While the monarchy appeared modern on the surface, Anne knew better than most that its strength had always come from its consistency, not its reinvention. With Catherine under fire and Camilla tightening her grip, Anne made a decision that would ripple through every corridor of power. She summoned her private secretary and began reviving Queen Elizabeth II's personal protocols, some written, many simply known. Scheduling rhythms changed overnight. Priorities shifted. Events that had once required months of planning under new systems were suddenly re-centered around simplicity, honor, and legacy. The Queen would have never allowed this. Anne was heard saying more than once in the days that followed. It wasn't spoken in anger, but as a quiet warning. And soon, those words became a mantra echoing through staff meetings and logistical briefings. With no press release and no official decree, Anne became the unofficial compass for tradition, reminding everyone of the order that had kept the monarchy upright through war, scandal, and generational upheaval. Junior aides, many of whom had never even worked under Elizabeth's reign, were seen pulling old calendars, ceremonial records, and handwritten memos from storage. Those who had served under the late Queen were relieved finally. Someone had restored clarity, direction, and reverence. Anne's actions did more than restore process, they reshaped perception. Catherine, who had once looked like a casualty of the internal shift, now began to shine again within Anne's framework. Her appearances aligned seamlessly with restored traditions. Her timing echoed the precision of the Queen, and her presence felt like continuity rather than competition. The press took note. Headlines praising Catherine's quiet strength returned. Editorials applauded Anne's silent leadership. And the public, already leaning in Catherine's favor, now fully embraced her as the embodiment of the late Queen's spirit. But while Anne and Catherine were stepping into legacy, Camilla found herself stumbling through resistance. Sources inside the palace say Camilla began feeling increasingly isolated. Her newer protocols clashed with Anne's revived structure. Staff, unsure of which direction to follow, began defaulting to Anne's guidance. Even long loyal aides to Camilla reportedly voiced frustration over the confusion, hinting that too many changes too quickly had fractured the palace's harmony. For Camilla, it was a slow erosion not of power, but of presence. Her influence no longer felt unchallenged. It felt out of sync. Her meetings ran late, her commands were second-guessed, and with Charles slipping further into silence, her political capital was dwindling fast. What Anne had done wasn't dramatic, it was strategic. She didn't need to remove Camilla. She simply reminded everyone what the monarchy was built on. And by anchoring that vision to Catherine, she re-established a powerful dual presence, one rooted in tradition, the other in grace. But even Anne knew that this tension couldn't hold forever. Sooner or later, someone would be forced to choose sides. But as tensions escalated, King Charles could no longer remain neutral. He had watched silently for months, torn between his wife, his sister, and his daughter-in-law. But when private arguments spilled into royal briefings, King Charles made a decision that shocked the entire monarchy. In a closed session, he delivered a verdict that redefined who held true influence moving forward. For weeks, Charles had avoided confrontation. His declining health had given him a kind of immunity, an excuse to retreat from the escalating storm engulfing his family. But silence, even for a monarch, has its limits. When reports of disunity began surfacing in press circles and whispers of factionalism reached foreign dignitaries, Charles realized the crown could no longer afford his hesitation. What unfolded behind those closed palace doors was less a conversation and more a reckoning. Charles summoned only 3 people: Anne, Camilla, and Catherine. Advisors were dismissed. No aides. No press secretaries. Just family. He began with what some described as uncharacteristic firmness, acknowledging the growing unrest surrounding recent protocol changes and the public fallout that followed. Anne, he said, had acted out of loyalty. Camilla, out of necessity. And Catherine, he emphasized, had remained graceful despite being caught in the crossfire. Then, in a voice that reportedly cracked with both conviction and fatigue, he made it clear. Catherine's role at the heart of the monarchy was not to be questioned or diminished. It was the Queen's wish, Charles said, and it will remain so. With that single declaration, he shattered Camilla's quiet campaign to centralize control and reaffirmed the legacy that Anne had fought so hard to preserve. But Charles didn't stop there. He turned to Anne and asked, not ordered, asked if she would assist in overseeing traditional ceremonial standards moving forward, invoking their mother's example as a guide. The request, though softly delivered, carried the weight of a royal decree. Anne, ever the soldier, nodded without hesitation. Camilla, on the other hand, remained still. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. But those present say her silence spoke louder than words. Her gaze didn't meet Charles's as she stood and exited the room, her departure heavy with the sting of quiet defeat. And while Charles attempted to close the discussion with a plea for unity, he quickly pivoted to his condition, citing the need to focus on his health and reduce personal involvement in future disputes. The message was clear. The king had spoken his final word on the matter. There would be no further mediation. But his verdict, though decisive, came far too late to reverse the storm it had tried to contain. The royal household had already fractured in perception. If not in form, the public had taken sides. And the symbolic weight of what had unfolded in private was already leaking through cracks in the palace facade. Camilla's power play had been checked, Anne's role had been solidified, and Catherine's position, once questioned, now stood not only reaffirmed but immortalized in the name of legacy. Yet even after the king's intervention, the damage was done, and public perception could not be reversed. In the end, no title was stripped, no official documents rewritten, but the people had seen enough. Across the kingdom, whispers became cheers for the woman many now saw as their future queen, not just by bloodline, but by heart. And standing silently beside her, Anne confirmed what many suspected. Catherine had already won. The tide hadn't turned through decree or force. It turned through grace, composure, and a quiet strength that reminded the nation of the woman they had lost not long ago, Queen Elizabeth II. Public sentiment, once cautiously divided, surged in favor of Catherine. Her humility, her silence in the face of betrayal, and her loyalty to the institution became a mirror reflecting the monarchy's best qualities. For the British people, Catherine was no longer just the Princess of Wales. She was the embodiment of everything the crown should aspire to be. Newspapers that had once speculated about rifts within the family now aligned clearly with Anne's perspective. Editorials referenced the return of royal dignity, crediting the Princess Royal's intervention and Catherine's resilience as the stabilizing force in what could have been a constitutional implosion. Opinion polls showed overwhelming public trust in Catherine's role. Her name trended globally, not because of scandal, but because of strength. Camilla, recognizing the shift, began stepping back from several key engagements. No formal announcements were made, but her absence became noticeable. Events she once presided over were suddenly handed to junior royals or reassigned to neutral territory. Her influence, though technically intact, felt dulled by the shadow of public disappointment. Meanwhile, Anne and Catherine emerged as a formidable duo. Their joint appearances increased charity, visits, ceremonial functions, and palace events where their unity became a quiet yet powerful symbol. They didn't speak of the past weeks. They didn't need to. Every coordinated step, every side-by-side moment, reminded the public that the monarchy wasn't collapsing, it was recalibrating, and the compass guiding it forward was set by women of integrity, not ambition. The legacy of Elizabeth continues, became more than a phrase, it became a rallying cry. It echoed across social platforms, inside Sunday columns, and even among palace insiders. Those who had feared the monarchy might drift into irrelevance suddenly saw a new, unexpected path forward, one rooted in old values, but renewed through modern grace. But beneath the celebrations and renewed confidence, fractures remained. Camilla's inner circle hadn't disappeared. Her loyalists within the royal household still held positions of influence, and while King Charles had spoken once with clarity, his silence thereafter created unease. The monarchy had survived this internal war, but the scars it left would not fade easily. Power had shifted but not vanished, and though unity returned to the public's eyes, behind palace walls, old tensions still lingered, waiting. And though the battle was never publicly acknowledged, behind royal walls it changed everything. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.